So until last week, we discussed what is the record, what is the page and page type and page architecture and what is the extent and what are the extent types we discussed, right? So today we can continue from there. The thing is what are the topics we are going to discuss today and last week? That is throughout the our class and as well as the for SQL Server, it's a core component. The thing is each and every area, the terminology will change, but these are the background concept it will use. Like if you want to restore, if you want to take a backup, if you want to configure the availability, if you want to go for any performance tuning, if you want to create a database, if you want to go for any kind of a high availability, those scenarios, this concept we must understand. Okay, so now we can discuss about the files. Just I will go for one file definition, then we'll go for database, then again we'll go for a files. Okay, so what is the file? So general concept what is the file means it's a file is a collection of a storage, right, that will store the records. Whenever the data is entering, okay, whenever the data is inserting, that has to store in the some kind of a file, some kind of a book, right? So here also in the SQL server, whenever the data entering, the data is going to store in the files. Okay, so those files we have a kind of a terminology called data file and a log file. So the file is nothing but it's collection of records. Okay, but what is the record? Whenever the user's data is entering, the data uh, will inserting as a record. In the further, it's going it's going to group together as a page. So the page group together into extent. So here the thing is the further extents will move to the file. So the thing is the data will go to the records. The the group of records are one record or two records. It has to store somewhere, right? And that is a page. So whenever the page is created, that page may be uniform extent or mixed extent. So whenever the new object created, that definitely it will go for mixed extent. Okay. So this mixed extent, uh, what I meant to say, uh, this mixed extents further group into a file. Okay. These files, uh, using this file, we have a better control to maintain the database in the SQL server. Okay. So now we can go for the exact definition of the files once we discussed the database definition. Hello, audio is very low. Okay, let me go for a. Now it's okay. Yeah, the thing is the file is file is a collection of extent. Like what are the extents? Further group into a file. A file will be better control for the SQL server to manage the database. Okay. So in the SQL server, terminology and technology.
Yeah, hi, bro.
Hey, Sadan. Just we started the class. Okay. Uh, it's a basic core concept. Okay. Yeah. So
Thank you. Yeah, please.
yeah. So the thing is the files will have a better control in the SQL server. So the files are in the database. The terminology we have a called like a data file and a log file. So data file we have a kind of a some other terminology we are going to discuss. Now we can discuss the database. So what is the database? So before discussing the database, like initially what we discussed, SQL Server is a software that will provide the infrastructure or provide the environment to maintain the data for business, right? So once we install the SQL Server, that is not going to maintain the entire data. Okay. So once we install the software, that software we have to manage how we are going to maintain the our environment. Okay. How we are going to maintain the our business. So that will be decided by the developers and business. So now this is the called like a software. Once we install the software may be SQL Server 2016, the software may be SQL Server 2019, that software may be SQL Server 2022, whatever it may be. Once we install the software, that software will have some background databases. Okay, that background databases, what is the purpose? We can discuss once we install the SQL Server. So once we install the software, that will allow, that will provide the environment to organize the business or operations by using the database. So once we install the software, that is not going to directly uh, provide the any business logic. The business logics should be created under the database. So the database, what we need to do, database team will create the one database and we will provide the this information to the development team. So that development, what they will do, they will create a certain kind of a, tables, functions, and views, and some other kind of a business logic. So that will provide the environment to maintain the organizations or business. So the thing is like, if you see the diagram, so now we are going to discuss about the database architecture, not for the SQL Server architecture. So we have a two kind of a architecture. One is SQL Server architecture and another one is database architecture. So all these topics like database architecture and buffer pool and some other pages we discussed it. Then we can go for the SQL architecture. Now we'll go for the database architecture. So this database architecture, generally we are going to discuss about the our user database architecture. Okay. So whenever we install the SQL software, by default, we will get a few databases. Those databases are system databases. Each and every databases having their own core components are responsible. We can discuss what are the master database and model database, MS database, TempDB, and we have another two databases we can discuss. Now we are going to discuss about the user database. So this is the user database we are going to create and we can provide this information to the uh, development team so that they will create their business logics and tables and some other things using the this user database. Entire operations will control. Okay. So now the thing is like what is the database? So I'm telling like we are discussing about the database, right? So the SQL Server database administrator, what exactly we are going to do? The database administrator, we are going to create the databases and we are going to maintain the security and we are going to provide the access part and we are going to take the backup and we are going to do the restore and we are going to provide the some availability technologies and we are going to provide the better performance to while executing the query. So what exactly the database it will do? So the database, if you go for normal terminology, what is the database? So for the normal database terminology, database is a container. So container means it will hold the all the data. So the container, what exactly is going to do? Then the container, what are the data or tables we are going to create and views and stored phrases functions. You like using the tables and views and stored functions and everything will it will hold the database. But the thing is like the tables, views, stored phrases and functions that will be vary from one database to another database. One minute. So the database will vary from one user database to another user database. But whenever we creating the user database, it will have the some core files. But the actual concept of the database, it will hold the our actual data, okay, and it will provide the operations, and it will provide the like a data storage. Whatever the data we are going to keep, that data is structured, but that structure has to define the developers or business logic. If you're not going to design the structure or business logic, the data will be stored, but it is not going to maintain some other asset properties. So that is the reason what are the database is created, the database functionalities, core concept is same. The thing is like it has to store the data and it has to retrieve the data from the database. But the functionality will be changed from the what we are going to design from the business logic. So the business logic means like if we if you created the tables, if you're going to update the table, if you design the logic like once I update the table one, it is going to update the another table. That is a business logic. If you're not going to provide that business logic, it won't do it. So the thing is like entire the database kind of a business logic we have to maintain. So now we'll go for the actual definition from the Google, then we can discuss. Yeah. So like what are the like a content we are going to get from the Google, and we can discuss the data from the there so that you can understand the paper data. But the data like what are the topics we are going to discuss, that can be we can elaborate from the technical and as well as theoretical part. So now the thing is like what is the actual database definition? So if you ask generally what is the database? Database is a container that holds the tables and views and functions. Now if you go for the exact like white paper definition, SQL Server database is structured collection of related information and objects. So what is the structured? The structured means like we are going to store the data in the tables. So here what is the table? The table is nothing but a Excel spreadsheet. Like if you have the Excel, what we have a rows and we have a columns, right? So like that, the table also we have a rows and columns. But the thing is like what are the data we are going to enter, that the data is structured. Okay. Then the data will be inserted into the table. So the thing is like when you inserting and when you retrieving the data, that will follow the SQL language. So using the SQL language, that will be data will be stored and retrieved. That is the meaning of the structured collection. Because whatever the data we are going to insert, we are going to retrieve, that has to follow the our structured query language. Like the data should be inserted in the proper manner. Then only the database will take the data and it will retrieve the data. If you're not maintaining proper structure, the data is not going to insert. So while inserting the data, while updating the data, while modifying the data, it has to follow the structure query language uh, concept, and it has to insert. That is the meaning of the structured. So database is a structured collection of related information and objects such as tables, views, stored phrases that stores the data, highly organized and relational model. So relational model means like a nothing but a if you updated the parent table, that has to updated the child table as well. So that is a kind of like a relational model. It's act as a central repository of the data used by the application and analytics and business intelligence. Here, what is the meaning of the central repository? The central repository means like our entire data will be sitting into the one place. That data will be accessed through the applications. So that application may be front-end application, that application may be web application, The application may be kind of a other applications. What are the data we are going to modify? That data will be sitting into the one place. So central repository means like if you take the bank, the every entire the bank data sitting into the one database, but that database will access through the network. So the people can be access the data throughout the network. That may be like Bangalore, that may be Hyderabad, or that may be some other places. They're going to access, but actual data is sitting into the one place, right? That is called like a central repository. This central repository based upon the where we are going to keep the our data center. So based upon the data center, the data will be sitting into the that location. From that location, data will be accessed from the applications. So applications is like when I open the Google, in that it is using the one page, right? That page itself using like a one application. I think like a Mitra, Amazon, any application. That application we are going to use the front end application as a internet. But when you going to try and access the data is coming from the one place. That is kind of like a central repository that the data sitting into the data center location. But the data will be shared or across or accessible through the network. Come on, network is slow. Yeah. So I hope you understand the definition of the database. So this is a very important called like a database. This database uh, is like a user database. Okay. This definition is for the user database. So the user database, we are going to create multiple databases on the our SQL Server software. So when we install our SQL Server software, that will provide the environment to organize the data. So once we install the software, that will allow to create the database. So here what is the definition of the database? So make a note for the interview question, what is the database? So the database is a structured collection of related information and objects such as tables and views and stored functions that store the highly organized. So here we no need to bother about the stored procedure, how to create the stored procedures, how to create the views, how to create the table. But we need to understand to how to create the table and how to create the view and how to create the stored procedure. So stable is nothing but a to retrieve the data in the form of rows and columns that has to follow the structure query language. So view is nothing but a mirror of the table. Using the table, we can create the view. Okay. So the table actual data will be stored, but views, the data cannot be stored physically. The logical data will be pointing to the table. So while creating the view, it may use some columns on the tables. Using that columns, views can be created. Okay. So now if you go for Oracle and Postgres, some other things, we have a material view. In the SQL server, we have only normal view. In the normal view, the data cannot be sitting into the physical location, but the data will be logically sitting, but actual data pulling from the table. And what is the stored procedure? The stored procedure is a collection of statements that can be joined together in the one place. And this using the stored procedure is not need to recompile the statements each and every time. The stored procedure can be compiled one time, but we are going to parse the parameters for the stored procedure. So this stored procedure creation will do from the application team or development team. But when we going for the performance tuning, we are going to go for deeper looker for the stored procedures. So here, no need to bother about how to create the stored procedure and how to create the inside the logic of the stored procedure. But we need to understand what is the stored procedure and what is the view and what is the table. Why? Because the database is a container. It will hold the table, it will hold the view, it will hold the stored procedure. Using the tables and views and stored procedure, data will be uh, stored in the one place, data will be accessed through the views, or data will be executing from the stored procedure. So the thing is like in that database, what are the core components? What is the core components? Yeah, the core components like a table. Table we already discussed, right? Table is with predefined columns and rows. Relationship between the different tables are maintained using by constructs like a primary key and foreign key. So here we need to understand the primary key and foreign key and unique key. So if you are not understanding the what is the primary key and what is the foreign key and what is the unique key, we can maintain the database, but when we go for deeper performance tuning, when we go for table partitioning, and when we go for any kind of a data purging, and when we go for replication concept, that time we need to understand this area. So that is the reason we need to understand what is the definition of the primary key and what is the definition of a foreign key and what is the definition of unique key. Here we are not going to create any primary key and foreign keys, but those will help to understand the our database. Why? Because we need to understand the core components, how they will behave. So whenever we're creating the database, from the database perspective, we will create the database and we will hand over to the database name and database user or login and server name to the developers, so that the developer will create the tables, the developers will create the primary key, the developers will create the foreign keys, and they will create the other functionalities using their business logic. So here no not about the how to create the primary key, how to create the foreign key, but it's always better to understand the definition of the primary key and how to create primary key and how to create the foreign key. So the general topic of core component of the primary key means like the primary key is the one of the core component or key. So whenever we go for the primary key in the table, that won't allow duplicate values and null values to the that particular column or row, because primary means like it won't allow the duplicate numbers. It won't allow any empty field on that particular row. So it's very important for the to maintain the proper data structure. Each and every database must have contain the one primary key. If it doesn't have primary key, then we can see lot of duplicate values, but that also fully depends upon the application design. Why? Because we may require some duplicate data, but the duplicate data may be different from one person to another persons. So that will be fully depend from the application design. So here, what is the core component of the primary key? The primary key is nothing but a primary key is the one of the key that the primary key can be applied on the column. Okay. So whenever creating the table, we are going to define the like application is going to define the column name and the data type. Okay. From there, they will mention the one particular column on the primary key. So from the database perspective, we cannot define the column. This column, we need to make a primary key that always define from the developers or business. They only design the which column is suitable for to create the primary key. Okay. So no need to bother about the how to create the primary key, but as I mentioned, always better to get knowledge on the primary key. So now what is the foreign key? So the foreign key and primary key both are the correlation or interrelation. So the foreign key is nothing but whenever you update, like we need to make some business logic. Okay. We most of the table having primary key. If the primary key is mapping to the another column using the foreign key, so that means whenever we updating the one row of that particular field, it has to reflect to the that particular relation table. So generally, it will the application team or business the logic what it will do whenever you want to update the parent table, it has to update the child table. So that time the primary key will map it to the another table column using the foreign keys. So the foreign key will maintain the data consistency between parent to child table to the data integrity and reducing the data redundancy. So just get knowledge from the primary key and foreign key. Why? Because it's very important when we going for the data purging. Why? Because when you deleting the data from the one table, that particular data has to delete from the child table as well. If you doesn't know about this concept, the thing is like we can see some inconsistency data to the child table. So another thing is like the core concept for the database, the structured query language. So like we mentioned, right? Whenever you want to insert the data, delete the data. So the database has to understand the language, like how the data has to insert and how the data has to like retrieve. So if you're not following the proper communication, so the thing is like now I'm teaching in the class as a English language. But if I'm teaching like a Telugu, if I'm teaching like a Tamil, but other people won't understand it. So that means I have to follow the some structured query language. The people has to understand the that language. So our SQL server will follow the some query language. Using the that query language, that the data will be insert. So the people will get confused. Why? Because some database will be in the Chinese language, and then some database will be like a general lattice and UK. That is data how the inserting inside, but how the actual database is going to interact. So that is a T-SQL. Using the T-SQL, the data can be insert or update. So that is a structured query language. Using the T-SQL statement, the data can be insert and delete to the database. And if you going to click the any page, like if you open any online site, whenever you clicking the one button, the in the background it has to go for lot of transaction statements. Okay, using that transaction statement, the data will be insert or maybe delete. That is a structured query language. So yeah, DBMS we already discussed in the initial topic, right? I'm not going to cover this one. So now we are going to discuss about the asset properties. So this asset properties is very important. Now we are going to cover. So now let me stop the recording and we can go for the asset properties, because asset properties and transaction will go for the one module after this section. Okay. So I hope you people understand the definition of the database, and you need to get some knowledge on the primary key and foreign keys, and some other keys, unique key and yeah, mostly like a primary key and a foreign key and a unique key people will use in the business logics. There are some other constants. If you get try to if you have any time, some get knowledge on the those concept as well. So let me stop the recording for the definition of the database. Okay, let me stop the recording.